Hello. How's everyone doing on this particular frightful Wednesday evening? Hold on, let me turn myself up just a little bit. There we go, because this is a slightly different slightly different from our normal proceedings. It's a return of horror horror story ASMR. And I figured last time was the reception seemed to be pretty well for the last one, admittedly my first one. So I figured this is a special week anyway. Let's see if we can bring it back for another go. I hope everyone has had a frightfully pleasant time zone. It's the middle of the week. It's hump day. But that does mean you are one day closer to the weekend. So, look forward to that. It is quite a terrifying thing, indeed, to be so far away from rest and relaxation. But you can power through it. I know you can. So I haven't started the ambience music yet. Right now, just making sure everything else is working as intended. Seems like it. Seems like everything is. All right. Excuse me. Well, let's see. I've got a few particularly engaging stories of terror ready for your eager ears. Some of you might need to grab something to hold on to. Whether it's your significant other, maybe a plushie, perhaps even your pillow. If you're prone to being scared. For the others that enjoy these, feel free to wrap yourself up in a nice blanket. Get yourself some tea or your preferred cooled beverage. It is still pretty warm these days. And get comfy. Turn down the lights to get the appropriate mood lighting. And get comfy. Because we're going to be reading some more frightening tales of terror. So, last time we... excuse me. Last time we did this, we primarily focused on creepypastas, internet-hosted short stories, contributed by various internet users. Today, I figured we'd go into a little bit more of, how do I want to put this? I don't want to say proper published, but collections of stories from established, well, maybe not established. What kind of words should we use for this? I guess we can use longer form, the phrase longer form, or maybe possibly book published stories. Maybe that's a good descriptor. There we go. Book published stories. And I actually do have some physical books on hand. I do have a couple of physical books ready and available. So, okay, we can kind of jump back and forth between some entries we can get for the book published works, and we can go for the internet published works as well. go for a bit of a more varied mix of titles on this particular evening. So let's see what we want to get started on first, shall we? Let's see what we can get started on first. Because, let's see here. Actually, I think I may have something available. Give me a quick sec, because I think I got a story we can start off with. I think we got something we can start off with. Let's see here. How about this? Let me get comfortable myself. There we go. Yeah. Alright, get nice and good. Get in a good position here. Let's see. Now, for our first tale on this evening is an interesting one. I can kind of attest firsthand, like, when you first become one of the undead, and my cats have seen more than enough examples of this. When you first arrive into undeath, there are some things that you need to learn about. Various rules, both written and unwritten. There's a bit of an approach to things. A bit of a, how should I put this? Form of conduct, I suppose. Whether you're intending to scare the living, or if you prefer to live your own life away from civilization, not bothering anyone, or maybe jumping back and forth. There are certain things one needs to learn when they're undead. And this is an interesting case of a particular ghost that kind of had to learn some lessons the hard way. This is the story of the inexperienced ghost by one H.G. Wells. The scene amidst which Clayton told his last story comes back very vividly to my mind. There he sat, for the greater part of the time, in the corner of the authentic settle by the spacious open fire, and Sanderson sat beside him smoking the Broseley clay that bore his name. There was Evans, and that marvel among actors, Wish, who was also a modest man. We had all come down to the Mermaid Club that Saturday morning, except Clayton, who had slept there overnight, which indeed gave him the opening of his story. We had golfed until golfing was invisible, we had dined, and we were in that mood of tranquil kindliness where men will suffer a story. When Clayton began to tell one, we naturally supposed he was lying. It may be that indeed he was lying. Of that the reader will speedily be able to judge, as well as I. He began, it is true, with an air of matter-of-fact anecdote, but that we thought was only the incurable artifice of the man. "I say," he remarked, after a long consideration of the upward rain of sparks from the log that Sanderson had thumped. "You know, I was alone here last night." "Except for the domestics," said Wish. "Who sleep in the other wing," said Clayton. "Yes, well," he pulled at his cigar. He pulled at his cigar for some little time as though he still hesitated about his confidence. Then he said, quite quietly, "I caught a ghost." "Caught a ghost? Did you?" said Anderson. "Where is it?" And Evans, who admires Clayton immensely and has been 4 weeks in America, shouted, "Caught a ghost, did you, Clayton? I'm glad of it. Tell us all about it right now." Clayton said he would in a minute, and asked him to shut the door. He looked apologetically at me. There's no eavesdropping, of course, but we don't want to upset our very excellent service with any rumors of ghosts in the place. There's too much shadow and oak paneling to trifle with that. And this, wasn't a regular ghost. I don't think it will come again. Ever. You mean to say you didn't keep it, said Sanderson. I hadn't the heart. Oh, I almost forgot. I should switch over to my appropriate ambience music for this. Let's see here. I almost forgot to start it. There we go. Turn that down just a little bit. There we go. That's more like it. Maybe a little bit more. That's about right. That seems about right. A little bit more just... There we go. A little bit more just to make sure. Gotta make sure I'm still audible with all of the creepy tones that I'm capable of after all. Now then, where was I? Let's see. Sanderson said he was surprised. We laughed, and Clayton looked aggrieved. I know, he said, with a flicker of a smile. But the fact is, it really was a ghost. And I'm as sure of it as I am that I am talking to you now. I'm not joking. I mean what I say. Sanderson drew deeply at his pipe, with one reddish eye on Clayton, and then emitted a thin jet of smoke, more eloquent than many words. Clayton ignored the comment. It is the strangest thing that has ever happened in my life, no? I never believed in ghosts or anything of the sort, before, ever, and then, I bagged one in a corner. The whole business is in my hands. He meditated still more profoundly and began to pierce a second cigar with a curious little stabber he affected. You talk to it, said Wish. For the space, probably of an hour. Chatty, I said, joining the party of skeptics. The poor devil was in trouble, said Clayton, bowed over his cigar end, and with the very faintest note of reproof. Sobbing, someone asked. Clayton heaved a realistic sigh at the memory. Good Lord, he said. Yes. And then, poor fellow. Yes. Where did you strike it? Asked Evans in his best American accent. I never realized, said Clayton, ignoring him. The poor sort of thing a ghost might be. And he hung us up again for a time, while he sought for matches in his pockets and lit and warmed to his cigar. I took an advantage, he reflected at last. We were none of us in a hurry. A character, he said, remains just the same character for all that it's been disembodied. That's a thing we too often forget. People with a certain strength or fixity of purpose may have ghosts of a certain strength and fixity of purpose. Most haunting ghosts, must be as one-ideaed as monomaniacs. Claus, hello there. Thank you so much for the raid. Welcome, welcome. You're just in time. We were just getting started on our first story of the evening. First Furby raid. Empty the register. This is a raid. Oh no. Unfortunately, I don't have any registers available. Well, maybe one, but it's probably filled with cobwebs and spiders and maybe a skeleton hand or two. Let me go ahead and shout you out real fast, Claus, because I really do appreciate the raid. Gotta make sure I spell it right. There you are,
A
right
new
there.
mortal has found the cemetery. Enjoy your stay.
Capcom the RN. Hello, welcome, welcome. Thank you so much for the follow. Enjoy your stay. So, welcome Raiders. I am Sawen. I am a Wraith VTuber and horror content creator. Currently tonight, we got something a little bit different. I bringing back horror story ASMR. How's your night going? I'm glad you asked, Maximka. Let me know if I'm pronouncing that name properly. And same to you, Capcom. Let me know if I pronounced your name properly. Evening has been going well so far. So, as I mentioned before, I'm a horror content creator. And tonight, we're reading some horror stories. So, if you wish to hang around, grab your blanket, dim your lights, grab yourself your favorite beverage, perhaps some tea to help calm your nerves. Because some of these off-rates get really frightening. Normally I would do my scary jitters, but I'm not sure if that would distract from the overall vibe. Well, I suppose I'll do one. And hopefully it won't pull away too much from the intended vibe.
I hope you have a terrifyingly fun time. There we go. I hope you enjoyed that.
Thank you so much again for the raid, Claws. Spooky jitters, yes. Had to bring my peeps over for spooky story time. I'm glad you did. Spooky jitters is why I lurk. Well, if you plan on lurking, then enjoy your lurk. Lurkers are more than welcome here. We were reading the story called The Story of the Inexperienced Ghost by H.G. Wells. And I was mentioning that when one is first awoken into undeath, there are certain things that one needs to learn before they can live their unlife to the fullest. And we were just talking about one Clayton, talking about how he encountered a ghost, and he was just about to regale us with his tale. So, get yourselves comfortable, and we shall continue. Also, feel free to let me know how the audio is, whether it's my own audio, or it's the sounds you're hearing in the background. I want to make sure everything is as terrifying as it should be. Where was I? Here we go. Let's see here. Let's see. We'll start from here. We were none of us in a hurry. A character, he said, remains just the same character for all that it's been disembodied. That's a thing we too often forget. People with a certain strength or fixity of purpose may have ghosts of a certain strength and fixity of purpose. Most haunting ghosts, must be as one-ideaed as monomaniacs and as obstinate as mules to come back again and again. This poor creature wasn't. He suddenly looked up rather queerly, and his eye went around the room. I say it, he said, in all kindliness, but that is the plain truth of the case. Even at the first glance, he struck me as weak. It's perfect, very spooky. Thank you. I'm glad. He punctuated with the help of his cigar. I came upon him, in the long passage. His back was towards me, and I saw him first. Right off, I knew him for a ghost. He was transparent and whitish. Clean through his chest, I could see the glimmer of the little window at the end. And not only his physique, but his attitude struck me as being weak. He looked, as though he didn't know the slightest whatever he meant to do. One hand was on the paneling, and the other fluttered to his mouth, like so. "What sort of physique?" said Sanderson. "Lean. You know that sort of young man's neck that has two great flutings down the back here and here? So. And a little meanish head with scrubby hair, and rather bad ears. Shoulders bad, narrower than the hips, turned down collar, ready-made short jacket, trousers baggy, and a little frayed at the heels. That's how he took me. I came very quietly up the staircase. I did not carry a light, The candles are on the landing table, and there is that lamp. And I was in my list slippers, and I saw him as I came up. I stopped dead at that, taking him in. I wasn't a bit afraid. I think that in most of these affairs, one is never nearly so afraid or excited as one imagines one would be. I was surprised and interested. I thought, good lord, here's a ghost at last. And I haven't believed for a moment in ghosts during the last 25 years. Said Wish. I suppose I wasn't on the landing a moment before he found out I was there. He turned on me sharply, and I saw the face of an immature young man, weak nose, a scrubby little mustache, a feeble chin. So for an instant we stood, he looking over his shoulder at me and regarded one another. Then he seemed to remember his high calling. He turned around, drew himself up, projected his face, raised his arms, spread his hands in approved ghost fashion, came towards me. As he did so, his little jaw dropped, and he emitted a faint, drawn-out "ooh." No, it wasn't. Not a bit dreadful. I dined. I'd had a bottle of champagne, and being all alone, perhaps 2 or 3, perhaps even 4 or 5 whiskeys, so I was as solid as rocks, and no more frightened than if I'd been sailed by a frog. "Boo," I said. "Nonsense. You don't belong to this place. What are you doing here?" I could see him wince. "Boo," he said. "Boo. Be hanged. Are you a member?" I said. And just to show that I didn't care a pin for him, I stepped through a corner of him and made to light my candle. "Are you a member?" I repeated, looking at him sideways. He moved a little so as to stand clear of me, and his bearing became crestfallen. "No," he said, in answer to the persistent interrogation of my eye. "I'm not a member. I'm a ghost." "Well, that doesn't give you the run of the Mermaid Club. Is there anyone you want to see, or anything of that sort?" And doing it as steadily as possible for fear that he should mistake the carelessness of whiskey for the distraction of fear, I got my candle alight. I turned on him, holding it. "What are you doing here?" I said. He had dropped his hands and stopped his booing, and there he stood, abashed and awkward, the ghost of a weak, silly, aimless young man. "I'm haunting," he said. "You haven't any business to," I said in a quiet voice. "I'm a ghost," he said, as if in defense. "That may be, but you haven't any business to haunt here. This is a respectable private club. People often stop here with nursemaids and children, and, going about in the careless way you do, some poor little mite could easily come upon you and be scared out of her wits. I suppose you didn't think about that. No, sir, he said. I didn't. You should have done. You haven't any claim on the place, have you? Weren't murdered here or anything of that sort? None, sir. But I thought as it was old and oak-paneled. That's no excuse, I regarded him firmly. Your coming here is a mistake, I said, in a tone of friendly superiority. I feigned to see if I had matches and then looked up at him frankly. If I were you, I wouldn't wait for cockcrow. I'd vanish right away. He looked embarrassed. The fact is, sir, he began. I'd vanish, I said, driving it home. The fact is, sir, that somehow I can't. You can't. No, sir. There's something I've forgotten. I've been hanging around here since midnight last night, hiding in the cupboards of the empty bedrooms and things like that. I've flurried. I've never come haunting before, and it seems to put me out. Put you out? Yes, sir. I've tried to do it several times, and it doesn't come off. There's some little thing has slipped me, and I can't get it back. That rather bowled me over. He looked at me in such an abject way that, for the life of me, I couldn't keep up quite the high, hectoring vein I had adopted. That's queer, I said, and as I spoke, I fancied I heard someone moving about down below. Come into my room and tell me more about it, I said. I didn't, of course, understand this, and I tried to take him by the arm, but of course you might as well have tried to take hold of a puff of smoke. I had forgotten my number, I think. Anyhow, I remember going into several bedrooms. It was lucky I was the only soul in that wing, until I saw my traps. Here we are, I said, sat down in the armchair. Sit down and tell me all about it. It seems to me you have got yourself into a jolly awkward position, old chap. One sec. There we go. Don't forget to hydrate. No, don't forget to hydrate. Paint Splatter, hello. How are you doing? Time to buckle in for this. Welcome, welcome. Glad you're able to swing by. I hope you had a terrifyingly pleasant time zone. Beat me to it. Dream Diary, hello. Glad to see you as well. Same to you. I hope you also had a terrifyingly pleasant time zone. We're just right in the middle of our first story. The story of the inexperienced ghost. And I was talking at the top of this about how when you first go into undeath, there are some things you need to figure out. It's a bit of a learning process. There's unfortunately no rule book that says do things this way or that way. A lot of it is you kind of have to learn about it as you go. But there are still some rules and unwritten rules. Ooh, thank you also for the hydrate. The timing of the bell was interesting. Was that planned? No, that's part of the ambience here. That is just the surroundings of the cemetery. There is a church bell not too far off, so sometimes the ghosts like to go up and play around it. So you may hear it off in the distance occasionally. I hope you enjoy the ambience. Now, where were we? Well, he said he wouldn't sit down. He'd prefer to flit up and down the room if it was all the same to me. And so he did. And in a little while, we were deep in a long and serious talk. And presently, something of those whiskeys and sodas evaporated out of me, and I began to realize just a little what a thundering rum and weird business it was that I was in. There he was, semi-transparent, a proper conventional phantom, and noiseless except for his ghost of a voice, flitting to and fro in that nice, clean chintz, I believe that's how it's pronounced, hung old bedroom. You could see the gleam of the copper candlesticks through him, and the lights on the brass fender, and the corners of the framed engravings on the wall. There he was telling me all about this wretched little life of his that had recently ended on Earth. He hadn't a particularly honest face, you know, but being transparent, of course, he couldn't avoid telling the truth. Eh? Said Wish, suddenly sitting up in his chair. What? Said Clayton. Being transparent. Couldn't avoid telling the truth. I don't see it, said Wish. I don't see it, said Clayton, with inimitable assurance. But it is so, I can assure you, nevertheless. I don't believe he got once a nail's breadth of the Bible truth. He told me how he had been killed. He went down into a London basement with a candle to look for a leakage of gas, and described himself as a senior English master in a London private school when that release occurred. Poor wretch, said I. That's what I thought. And the more he talked, the more I thought it. There he was, purposeless in life and purposeless out of it. He talked of his father and mother and his schoolmaster and all who had ever been anything to him in the world, meanly. He had been too sensitive, too nervous. None of them had ever valued him properly or understood him, he said. He had never had a real friend in the world, I think. He had never had a success. Excuse me. Pardon me, getting my words mixed up. He had shirked games and failed examinations. It's like that with some people, he said. Whenever I got into the examination room or anywhere, everything seemed to go. Engaged to be married, of course, to another oversensitive person. Pardon me. To another oversensitive person, I suppose. When the indiscretion with the gas escape ended his affairs. And where are you now? I asked. Not in... He wasn't clear on that point at all. The impression he gave me was a sort of vague intermediate state, a special reserve for souls too non-existent for anything so positive as either sin or virtue. I don't know. He was much too egotistical and unobservant to give me any clear idea of the kind of place, kind of country there is on the other side of things. Wherever he was, he seems to have fallen in with a set of kindred spirits, ghosts of weak Cockney young men who were on a footing of Christian names, and among these there was certainly a lot of talk about going haunting and things like that. Yes, going haunting. They seemed to think haunting a tremendous adventure, and most of them funked it all the time, and so primed, you know, he had come. But really, said Wish to the fire. These are the impressions he gave me, anyhow, said Clayton modestly. I may, of course, have been in a rather uncritical state, but that was the sort of background he gave to himself. He kept flitting up and down with his thin voice talking about his wretched self, and never a word of clear, firm statement from first to last. He was thinner and sillier and more pointless than if he had been real and alive. So I think I heard my cat trying to get in. I should have kicked him out. Of course, said Evans. There are poor mortals like that. And there's just as much of a chance of their having ghosts as the rest of us, I admitted. What gave a sort of point to him, you know, was the fact that he did seem within limits to have found himself out. The mess he had made of haunting had depressed him terribly. He had been told it would be a lark. He had come expecting it to be a lark, and here it was. Nothing but another failure added to his record. He proclaimed himself an utter out-and-out failure. He said, and I can quite believe it, that he had never tried to do anything all his life that he hadn't made a perfect mess of, and through all the wastes of eternity, he never would. If he had had sympathy, perhaps. Sorry, one sec. I think my cats are requiring my attention, so allow me to take care of them real fast. Sorry about that. I'm back. One cat has left the room. One cat has entered the room. Cats are such fickle creatures. I mentioned that I have 2 black cats, right? People still have hang-ups about black cats, even in the modern century. Lots of superstitions around them. But I like black cats. They're quite adorable. And they're deserving of all of the love and affection. Just like other cats. Let's see. Where was I at? Where did I leave off at? Here we go. Let's see. There we go. If he had had sympathy, perhaps. He paused at that, and stood regarding me. He remarked that, strange as it might seem to me, nobody, not anyone, ever, had given him the amount of sympathy I was doing now. I could see what he wanted straight away, and I determined to head him off at once. I may be a brute, you know, but being the only real friend, the recipient of the confidences of one of these egotistical weaklings, ghost or body, is beyond my physical endurance. I got up briskly. "Don't you brood on these things too much," I said. "The thing you've got to do is get out of this. Get out of this sharp. You pull yourself together and try." "I can't," he said. "You try," I said, and try he did. "Try," said Sanderson. "How?" "Passes," said Clayton. "Passes?" "Complicated series of gestures and passes with the hands. That's how he had come in, and that's how he had to get out again. Lord, what a business I had. "But how could any series of passes?" I began. "My dear man," said Clayton, turning on me and putting a great emphasis on certain words. "You want everything clear. I don't know how. All I know is that you do, that he did, anyhow, at least. After a fearful time, you know, he got his passes right and suddenly disappeared." "Did you," said Sanderson slowly, "observe the passes?" "Yes," said Clayton, and seemed to think it was tremendously queer. He said, "There we were, and I and this thin, vague ghost in that silent room, in this silent, empty inn, in this silent little Friday night town. Not a sound, except our excuse me, that is not the right word at all. Not a sound except our voices and a faint painting he made when he swung. A panting, sorry. I'm getting my words mixed up. I think I may be reading a little too fast. My brain is replacing words for some reason. My apologies. There we go. Oh, just gotta pace myself a little bit more, you know? There was the bedroom candle, and one candle on the dressing table alight. That was all. Sometimes one or other would flare up into a tall, lean, astonished flame for a space, and queer things happened. I can't, he said. I shall never. And suddenly, he sat down on a little chair at the foot of the bed, and began to sob and sob. Lord, what a harrowing, whimpering thing he seemed. You pull yourself together, I said, and tried to pat him on the back, and my confounded hand went through him. By that time, I wasn't nearly so massive as I had been on the landing. I got the queerness of it full. I remember snatching back my hand out of him, as it were, with a little thrill, and walking over to the dressing table. You pull yourself together, I said to him, and try. And in order to encourage and help him, I began to try as well. Blue Imp, hello. Welcome, welcome. How are you doing? I hope you are having a terrifyingly pleasant time zone. Welcome to Horror Story ASMR. We're in the middle of our first story right now. The story of the inexperienced ghost. So, if you're able to, make sure to get comfortable. Working and lurking. Hey, feel free to lurk. Feel free to lurk. If anything, this is probably the best. These are kind of the best streams to lurk in. Just will quietly listen in. Thank you for lurking. I do hope you enjoy these tales of terror and fright. Although this one does have a bit of a more positive feel to it. We're talking about, and Clayton here is talking about how he was trying to motivate a clearly inexperienced ghost. Someone who really didn't quite have a grasp of how to haunt. So Clayton, proving to be a decent mortal, opted to help this poor, unfortunate spirit. Where was I? Ah, here we go. What? Said Sanderson. The passes? Yes, the passes. But, I said, moved by an idea that eluded me for a space. This is interesting, said Sanderson, with his finger in his pipe bowl. You mean to say this ghost of yours gave away? Did his level best to give away the whole confounded barrier? Yes. He didn't, said Wish. He couldn't, or you'd have gone there too. That's precisely it, I said, finding my elusive idea put into words for me. That is precisely it, said Clayton, with thoughtful eyes upon the fire. For just a little while, there was silence. And at last he did it, said Sanderson. At last, he did it. I had to keep him up to it hard, but he did it at last. Rather suddenly. He despaired. We had a scene. And then he got up abruptly and asked me to go through the whole performance, slowly, so that he might see. I believe, he said, if I could see, I should spot what was wrong at once. And he did. I know, he said. What do you know? Said I. I know, he repeated. Then he said peevishly, I can't do it if you look at me. I really can't. It's been that, partly, all along. I'm such a nervous fellow that you put me out. Well, we had a bit of an argument. Naturally, I wanted to see, but he was as obstinate as a mule, and suddenly I had come over as tired as a dog. He tired me out. All right, I said. I won't look at you, and turned towards the mirror on the wardrobe by the bed. He started off very fast. I tried to follow him by looking in the looking glass, to see just what it was had hung. Round went his arms and his hands, so and so and so, and Then, with a rush, came to the last gesture of all. You stand erect and open out your arms. And so, don't you know, he stood. And then he didn't. He didn't. He wasn't. I wheeled around from the looking glass to him. There was nothing. I was alone, with the flaring candles and a staggering mind. What had happened? Had anything happened? Had I been dreaming? And then, with an absurd note of finality about it, the clock upon the landing discovered the moment was ripe for striking 1. So, King... And I was as grave and sober as a judge, with all my champagne and whiskey gone into the vast serene. Feeling queer, you know. Confoundedly queer. Queer. Good lord. Apparently, the way to release yourself from a residence that you're haunting in is to T-pose. That's the feeling I got at the very least. Imagine T-posing, not only to assert dominance, but to either let yourself into an establishment to haunt, or to let yourself out of an establishment that you're haunting. I can't really attest to that myself. I don't know. It's interesting. Maybe that particular establishment required such a particular ritual. One sec. Oh, me. There we go. He regarded his cigar ash for a moment. That's all that happened, he said. Sorry, my cat is throwing a fit again. One sec, she's causing a fit. One sec. Sorry about that. Tori apparently changed her mind. She is the one that's the most fickle. There you are. You just gotta behave, Tori, okay? Just behave. Where was I? Where was I? Let's see. Ah, here we go. And then you went to bed, asked Evans. What else was there to do? I looked Wish in the eye. We wanted to scoff, and there was something perhaps in Clayton's voice and manner that hampered our desire. And about these passes, said Sanderson. I believe I could do them now. Oh, said Sanderson, produced a penknife and set himself to grub the doddle out of the bowl of his clay. Why don't you do them now? Said Sanderson, shutting his penknife with a click. That's what I'm going to do, said Clayton. They won't work, said Evans. If they do, I suggested. You know, I'd rather you didn't, said Wish, stretching out his legs. Why? Asked Evans. I'd rather he didn't, said Wish. But he hasn't got 'em right, said Sanderson, plugging too much tobacco in his pipe. All the same, I'd rather he didn't, said Wish. We argued with Wish. He said that for Clayton to go through those gestures was like mocking a serious matter. But you don't believe it, I said. Wish glanced at Clayton, who was staring into the fire, weighing something in his mind. I do more than half, anyhow I do, said Wish. Clayton, said I, you're too good a liar for us. Most of it was all right, but that disappearance happened to be convincing. Tell us. It's a tale of cock and bull. He stood up without heeding me, took the middle of the hearthrug, and faced me. For a moment he regarded his feet thoughtfully, and then for all the rest of the time, his eyes were on the opposite wall with an intent expression. He raised his two hands slowly to the level of his eyes, and so began. Now, Sanderson is a Freemason, member of the Lodge of the Four Kings, which devotes itself so ably to the study and elucidation of all the mysteries of masonry, past and present. And among the students of this lodge, Sanderson is by no means the least. He followed Clayton's motions with a singular interest in his reddish eye. "That's not bad," he said, when it was done. "You really do, put things together, Clayton, in a most amazing fashion. But there's one little detail out." Tale of cock and ball. Got it. Hello there, shiny rays. How you doing? Thank you for swinging by. I hope you've had a terrifyingly pleasant time zone. Yeah, this is an older tale, so the terminology may come off as a little odd compared to today's time period. But it's no worries. Doing fine, just gonna chill and listen. That is perfectly fine. Just make sure you get comfortable. Wouldn't want you to scare too badly. "I know," said Clayton. "I believe I could tell you which." "Well, this," said Clayton, and did a queer little twist and writhing and thrust of his hands. "Yes, that, was what he couldn't get right," said Clayton. "But how do you? Most of this business, and particularly how you invented it, I don't understand at all," said Sanderson. "But just that phase, I do," he reflected. "These happen to be a series of gestures, connected with a certain branch of esoteric masonry. Probably, Or else, how?" He reflected still further. "I do not see that I can do any harm in telling you just the proper twist. After all, if you know, you know. If you don't, you don't." "I know nothing," said Clayton, "except what the poor devil let out last night." "Well, anyhow," said Sanderson, and placed his church warden very carefully upon the shelf over the fireplace. Then very rapidly he gesticulated with his hands. "So," said Clayton, repeating. "So," said Sanderson, and took his pipe in hand again. "Ah, now," said Clayton, "I can do the whole thing right." He stood up before the waning fire and smiled at us all. I think there was just a little hesitation in his smile. "If I begin," he said. "I wouldn't begin," said Wish. "It's all right," said Evans. "Matter is indestructible. You don't think any jiggery-pokery of this sort is going to snatch Clayton into the world of shades? Not it. You may try, Clayton, so far as I'm concerned, until your arms drop off at the wrists." "I don't believe that," said Wish, and stood up and put his arm around Clayton's shoulder. "You've made me half believe in that story somehow, and I don't want to see the thing done." "Goodness," said I. "Here's Wish frightened." "I am," said Wish, with real or admirably feigned intensity. "I believe that if he goes through these motions, right, he'll go." "He'll not do anything of the sort," I cried. "There's only one way out of this world for men, and Clayton is 30 years from that. Besides, it's such a ghost. Do you think—" Wish interrupted me by moving. He walked out from among our chairs and stopped beside the table and stood there. "Clayton," he said, "you're a fool." Clayton, with a humorous light in his eyes, smiled back at him. "Wish," he said, "is right, and all you others are wrong. I shall go. I shall get to the end of these passes, and as the last swish whistles through the air, presto! This hearthrug will be vacant. The room will be blank amazement, and a respectably dressed gentleman of 15 stone will plump into the world of shades. I'm certain. So will you be." I declined to argue further. Let the thing be tried. No, said Wish, and made a step and ceased, and Clayton raised his hands once more to repeat the spirit's passing. By that time, we were all in a state of tension, largely because of the behavior of Wish. We sat, all of us, with our eyes on Clayton, and I, at least, with a sort of tight, stiff feeling about me, as though from the back of my skull to the middle of my thighs my body had been changed to steel. And there, with a gravity that was imperturbably serene, that is an interesting word there. Clayton bowed and swayed and waved his hands and arms before us. As he drew towards the end, one piled up, one tingled in one's teeth. The last gesture, I have said, was to swing the arms out wide open with the face held up. And when at last he swung out to this closing gesture, I ceased even to breathe. It was ridiculous, of course, but that ghost story feeling. It was after dinner in a queer old shadowy house. Would he, after all? There he stood for one stupendous moment, with his arms open and his upturned face assured and bright in the glare of the hanging lamp. We hung through that moment as if it were an age, and then came from all of us something that was half a sigh of infinite relief and a half reassuring no. For visibility, he wasn't going. It was all nonsense. He had told an idle story and carried it almost to conviction. That was all. Then that moment the face of Clayton changed. It changed. It changed as a lit house changes when its lights are suddenly extinguished. His eyes were suddenly eyes that were fixed. His smile was frozen on his lips, and he stood there still. He stood there, very gently swaying. That moment, too, was an age. Then, chairs were scraping, things were falling, and we were all moving. His knees seemed to give, and he fell forward, and Evans rose and caught him in his arms. It stunned us all. For a minute. I suppose no one said a coherent thing. We believed it, yet could not believe it. It came out of a muddled stupefaction to find myself kneeling beside him, and his vest and shirt were torn open. Sanderson's hand lay on his heart. Well, the simple fact before us could very well wait our convenience. There was no hurry for us to comprehend. It lay there for an hour. It lies athwart my memory, black and amazing still to this day. Clayton had, indeed, passed into the world that lies so near to and so far from our own, and he had gone thither by the only road that mortal man may take. But whether he did indeed pass there by that poor ghost's incantation, or whether he was stricken suddenly by apoplexy in the midst of an idle tale, as the coroner's jury would have us believe, is no matter for my judging. It is just one of those inexplicable riddles that must remain unsolved till the final solution of all things shall come. All I certainly know is that, in the very moment, in the very instant of concluding those passes, he changed and staggered and fell down before us, dead. An interesting tale with an interesting twist. What do you think? Was the performance of the gestures enough to send his soul to the other side? Or was it merely coincidence? Perhaps he had a heart attack right as he finished, and that was the cause of his death. He did mention that he had quite a good amount to drink the previous evening and was smoking. Or was it the effect of the ghosts? that he had talked to the night before. Perhaps he really did encounter a wayward spirit, lost and confused. Isn't that an interesting query? I hope you like that story. It's the first for this evening. Just gotta let myself stretch out real fast. There we go. Stretch yourselves out. Take the moment to stretch your limbs. Stretch it out. Keep your arms limber. Stretch out your back. Yeah. Doesn't that feel much better? Raise, thank you so much for the hydrate. I was actually just doing that. Thank you for the redeem. I was actually thinking, if we do more of these, I wonder if I should invest in one of those, what are they called? Biannual microphones? I think they're called. Good stretch. Yes. There we go. There we go. Pop those bones back into place. Yeah, there we go. The spoopy ears on the stand? Yes, those ones exactly. Apparently, they're meant to simulate how sound is delivered from one ear to the other ear. At least that's how I understand it. They work. Maybe not. Maybe one that doesn't have the creepy ears attached to it. That's weird even for me. But, hey, if we do more of these ASMR sessions, it might be something worth investing in. I suppose I can always throw one up on my throne. I do have a throne after all. I believe. Let me see if I can pull that up. I should really make a stream for that. I really should make a stream command to bring that up. There is a few things on there. Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? There it is. I always have a hard time finding it. I have a lot of bookmarked stuff. Quite a bit. There we go. I believe that's the right link. So maybe I'll throw one of those microphones on there. You know, might enhance the experience for some of these streams if we do them further on down the road. I may look into that later. For now, let's see if we can keep going. What should our next tale be? I do have a number of them available. Let's see. Ooh. Here we go. I got one set up right here. This one, yeah, this one is not going to be, or at least it shouldn't be as long as the previous one. And I got this one online, so I don't have to hold a book in front of me for this one. I should look into a book holder, a proper book holder. That way I can just like set it in front of me, maybe set up a book light to help illuminate the pages. Keep my hands free so that I can do some particularly frightful gestures. That's another thing I should probably look into. But for now, let's go ahead and move on to our next story. Let's see, this one is called The Mass of Shadows by Anatole France. Copyright by John Lane Company by permission of the publishers. Let's see here. This tale, the sacristan of the Church of Saint Eulalie at Neuville-d'Amont. There we go. Zoom that in a little bit. There we go. So I can just a little bit better. Oh, now I lost my place. I have lost my place. There we go. That should help things. This tale, the sacristan of the Church of Saint Eulalie at Neuville-d'Amont told me as we sat under the arbor of the White Horse one fine summer evening, drinking a bottle of old wine to the health of the dead man, now very much at his ease, whom that very morning he had borne to the grave with full honors, neath a pall powdered with smart silver tears. My poor father, who is dead, it is the sacristan who is speaking, was in his lifetime a grave digger. He was of an agreeable disposition, the result, no doubt, of the calling he followed, for it has often been pointed out that people who work in cemeteries are of a jovial turn. Death has no terrors for them. They never give it a thought. I, for instance, monsieur, enter a cemetery at night as little perturbed as though it were the arbor of the White Horse, and if by chance I meet with a ghost, I don't disturb myself in the least about it, for I reflect that he may just as likely have business of his own to attend to as I. I know the habits of the dead, and I know their character. Indeed, so far as that goes, I know things of which the priests themselves are ignorant. If I were to tell you all I have seen, you would be astounded. The still tongue makes a wise head, and my father, who all the same delighted in spinning a yarn, did not disclose a 20th part of what he knew. To make up for this, he often repeated the same stories, and to my knowledge, he told the story of Catherine Fontaine at least 100 times. Catherine Fontaine was an old maid whom he well remembered having seen when he was a mere child. I should not be surprised if there were still perhaps 3 old fellows in the district who could remember having heard folks speak of her, for she was very well known and of excellent reputation, though poor enough. She lived at the corner of the Rue aux Nuns, in the turret which is still to be seen there, and which formed as part of an old half-ruined mansion looking on to the garden of the Ursuline nuns. On that turret can still be traced certain figures and half-obliterated inscriptions. The late curé of Saint Eulalie, Monsieur Levasseur, asserted that there are words in Latin, love is stronger than death, which is to be understood, so he would add, of divine love. Catherine Fontaine lived by herself in this tiny apartment. She was a lace maker. You know, of course, that the lace made in our part of the world was formerly held in high esteem. No one knew anything of her relatives or friends. It was reported that when she was 18 years of age, she had loved the young Chevalier d'Aumont Cléry, and had been secretly affianced him. But decent folk didn't believe a word of it, and said it was nothing but a tale concocted because Catherine Fontaine's demeanor was that of a lady rather than that of a working woman, and because, moreover, she possessed beneath her white locks the remains of great beauty. Her expression was sorrowful, and on one finger she wore one of those rings fashioned by the goldsmith into the semblance of 2 tiny hands clasped together. In former days, folks were accustomed to exchange such rings at their betrothal ceremony. Apologies. I am sure you know the sort of thing I mean. Wraith Bible? Oh, this is no Bible, trust me. If this was a Bible, my hands would be burning right now, figuratively and literally. But welcome, Silent Wolf. How you doing? Thank you for swinging by. I hope you've had a terrifyingly pleasant time zone. We're just getting started in our second story for the evening. So, sit back, wrap yourself in a nice blanket, turn down the lights, get comfortable, and get ready for fright. Catherine Fontaine lived a saintly life. She spent a great deal of time in churches, and every morning, whatever might be the weather, she went to assist at the 6 o'clock Mass at St. Eulalie. Thank you, Ghost, for the well-timed bell ringings. They do enjoy playing with that giant bell. It's 94 degrees. Fair. So maybe eschew the blankets. Maybe eschew the blanket in that case. Find yourself a nice, cool beverage. Perhaps some tea. A nice tall glass of water. Or your preferred iced alcoholic drink. Something to help cool you down. Whatever helps to make yourself comfortable. Now, one December night, while she was in her little chamber, she was awakened by the sound of bells, and nothing doubting that they were ringing for the first Mass. The pious woman dressed herself and came downstairs and out into the street. The night was so obscure that not even the walls of the houses were visible. Not a ray of light shone from the murky sky, and such was the silence amid this black darkness that there was not even the sound of a distant dog barking, and a feeling of aloofness from every living creature was perceptible. But Catherine Fontaine knew every single stone she stepped on, and as she could have found her way to the church with her eyes shut, she reached without difficulty the corner of the Rue aux Nuns and the Rue de la Perros, where the timbered house stands with the tree of Jesse carved on one of its massive beams. When she reached this spot, she perceived that the church doors were open, and that a great light was streaming out from the wax tapers. She resumed her journey, and when she had passed through the porch, she found herself in the midst of a vast congregation which entirely filled the church. But she did not recognize any of the worshippers, and was surprised to observe that all of these people were dressed in velvets and brocades, with feathers in their hats, and that they wore swords in the fashion of days gone by. Here were gentlemen who carried tall canes with gold knobs, and ladies with lace caps fastened with coronet-shaped combs. Chevaliers of the Order of St. Louis extended their hands to these ladies, who concealed behind their fans painted faces, of which only the powdered brow and the patch at the corner of the eye were visible. All of them proceeded to take their places without the slightest sound, and as they moved, neither the sound of their footsteps on the pavement nor the rustle of their garments could be heard. The lower places were filled with a crowd of young artisans in brown jackets, dimity breeches, and blue stockings, with their arms around the waists of pretty blushing girls who lowered their eyes. Near the holy water stooped peasant women in scarlet petticoats and laced bodices sat upon the ground as immovable as domestic animals, whilst young lads, standing up behind them, stared out from wide-open eyes, twirled their hats round and round on their fingers. All these sorrowful countenances seemed centered irremovably on one and the same thought, at once sweet and sorrowful. On her knees in her accustomed place, Catherine Fontaine saw the priest advance toward the altar, preceded by two servers. She recognized neither priests nor clerks. The Mass began. It was a silent Mass, during which neither the sound of the moving lips nor the tinkle of the bell was audible. Catherine Fontaine felt she was under the observation and the influence also of her mysterious neighbor, and when, scarcely turning her head, she stole a glance at him, she recognized the young Chevalier d'Aumont Cléry, who had once loved her, and who had been dead for 45 years. She recognized him by the small mark which he had over the left ear, and above all by the shadow which his long black eyelashes cast upon his cheeks. He was dressed in his hunting clothes, scarlet with gold lace, the very clothes he wore that day when he met her in St. Leonard's Wood, begged of her a drink, and stole a kiss. He had preserved his youth and good looks. When he smiled, he still displayed magnificent teeth. Catherine said to him in an undertone, Monseigneur, you who were my friend, and to whom in days gone by I gave all that a girl holds most dear, may God keep you in his grace. Oh, that you would at length inspire me with regret for the sin I committed in yielding to you, for it is a fact that, though my hair is white and I approach my end, I have not yet repented of having loved you. But dear dead friend and noble seigneur, tell me, who are these folk, habited after the antique fashion, who are here assisting at this silent mass? The Chevalier d'Aumont Cléry replied in a voice feebler than the breath, none the less crystal clear. Catherine, these men and women are souls from purgatory who have grieved God by sinning as we ourselves sinned through love of the creature, but who are not on that account cast off by God, inasmuch as their sin, like ours, was not deliberate. While separated from those whom they loved upon earth, they are purified in the cleansing fires of purgatory. They suffer the pangs of absence, which is for them the most cruel of tortures. They are so unhappy that an angel from heaven takes pity upon their love torment. By the permission of the Most High, for 1 hour in the night, he reunites each year lover to love in their parish church, where they are permitted to assist at the Mass of Shadows, hand clasped in hand. These are the facts. If it has been granted to me to see thee before thy death, Catherine, it is a boon which is bestowed by God's special permission. And Catherine Fontaine answered him, I would die gladly enough, dear dead lord, if I might recover the beauty that was mine when I gave you to drink force. Whilst they thus conversed under their breath, a very old canon was taking the collection and proffering to the worshippers a great copper dish, wherein they let fall, each in his turn, ancient coins which have long since ceased to pass current, excuse of 6 livres, florins, ducats, and ducatoons, jacoboses, and rose nobles, and the pieces fell silently into the dish. I hope I pronounced all of those correctly. When at length it was placed before the Chevalier, he dropped into it a louis, which made no more sound and had the other pieces of gold and silver. Then the old canon stopped before Catherine Fontaine, who fumbled in her pocket without being able to find a farthing. Then, being unwilling to allow the dish to pass without an offering from herself, she slipped from her finger the ring which the Chevalier had given her the day before his death, and cast it into the copper bowl. As the golden ring fell, a sound like the heavy clang of a bell rang out, and on the stroke of this reverberation, the Chevalier, the canon, the celebrant, the servers, the ladies, and their cavaliers, the whole assembly vanished utterly. The candles guttered out, and Catherine Fontaine was left alone in the darkness. Having concluded his narrative after this fashion, the sacristan drank a long draught of wine, remained pensive for a moment, and then resumed his talk in these words. I have told you this tale exactly as my father has told it to me over and over again, and I believe that it is authentic, because it agrees in all respects with what I have observed of the manners and customs peculiar to those who have passed away. I have associated a good deal with the dead ever since my childhood, and I know that they are accustomed to return to what they have loved. It is on this account that the miserably dead wander at night in the neighborhood of the treasures they concealed during their lifetime. They keep a strict watch over their gold. The trouble they give themselves, far from being of service to them, turns to their disadvantage, and it is not the rare thing at all to come upon money buried in the ground on digging in a place haunted by a ghost. In the same way, deceased husbands come by night to harass their wives who have made a second matrimonial venture, and I could easily name several who have kept a better watch over their wives since death than they ever did while living. That sort of thing is blameworthy, for in all fairness, the dead have no business to stir up jealousies. Still, I do but tell you what I have observed myself. It is a matter to take into account if one marries a widow. Besides, the tale I have told you is vouchsafed for in the manner following. The morning after that extraordinary night, Catherine Fontaine was discovered dead in her chamber, and the beetle attached to St. Eulalie found in the copper bowl used for the collection a gold ring with 2 clasped hands. Besides, I'm not the kind of man to make jokes. Suppose we order another bottle of wine. Interesting how that played out. So I wonder, could have been the effect of her attending the ghostly mass? Perhaps it ended up being her time, so that she could be reunited with her lost love in death. They usually say, "Till death do you part." But sometimes love persists even after the fact. Here we go. I hope you enjoyed that tale. It was kind of cute, actually, in a sense. Imagine going out on your morning routine, and you just so happen to stumble upon a ghostly congregation. I wonder, what would you all do if you were to run into such a situation? Ghosts from purgatory that are allowed an hour of reprieve, an attempt to reunite with those that they were separated from. Would be an interesting place. Would be interesting to join in. And again, that was The Mass of Shadows by Anatole France. I'll be perfectly honest. I saw that title, and I had a completely different thoughts in mind, and a completely different idea of what the story was going to be about. I'm glad to see that the story itself went in a direction I wasn't expecting. I'm glad. It's a very interesting read. Very interesting read. Once again, don't forget to hydrate. Stretch yourselves out. Make sure you're nice and comfortable. Get those limbs all limbered up. And don't forget to hydrate. The monster under your bed will be making sure that you're fully hydrated. Let's begin, shall we? Once again, this is the cask of Amontillado. The 1,000 injuries of Fortunato I had borne as best I could, but when he ventured upon insult, I vowed revenge. You who so well know the nature of my soul will not suppose, however, that I gave utterance to a threat. At length I would be avenged. This was a point definitively settled, but the very definitiveness with which it was resolved precluded the idea of risk. I must not only punish, but punish with impunity. A wrong is unredressed when retribution overtakes its redresser. It is equally unredressed when the avenger fails to make himself felt as such to him who has done the wrong. It must be understood that neither by word nor deed had I given Fortunato cause to doubt my goodwill. I continued, as was my wont, to smile in his face, and he did not perceive that my smile now was at the thought of his immolation. He had a weak point, this Fortunato, although in other regards he was a man to be respected and even feared. He prided himself on his connoisseurship in wine. Few Italians have the true virtuoso spirit. For the most part, their enthusiasm is adopted to suit the time and opportunity to practice imposture upon the British and Austrian millionaires. In painting and gemmery, Fortunato, like his countrymen, was a quack, but in the matter of old wines, he was sincere. In this respect, I did not differ from him materially. I was skillful in the Italian vintages myself, but bought largely whenever I could. It was about dusk, one evening during the supreme madness of the carnival season, that I encountered my friend. He accosted me with excessive warmth, for he had been drinking much. The man wore motley. He had on a tight-fitting party-striped dress, and his head was surmounted by the conical cap and bells. I was so pleased to see him that I thought I should never have. Excuse me, sorry. I was so pleased to see him that I thought I should never have done wringing his hand. I said to him, "My dear Fortunato, you are luckily met. How remarkably well you are looking today. But I have received a pipe of what passes for Amontillado, and I have my doubts." "How?" said he. "Amontillado? A pipe? Impossible. And in the middle of a carnival?" "I have my doubts," I replied, "and I was silly enough to pay the full Amontillado price without consulting you in the matter. You were not to be found, and I was fearful of losing a bargain." "Amontillado. I have my doubts. Amontillado. And I must satisfy them. Amontillado. As you are engaged, I am on my way to Lucchesi. If anyone has a critical turn, it is he. He will tell me, Lucchesi cannot tell Amontillado from sherry. And yet some fools will have it that his taste is a match for your own. Come, let us go." "Whither?" "To your vaults." "My friend, no, I will not impose upon your good nature. I perceive you have an engagement. Lucchesi, I have no engagement. Come." "My friend, no, it is not the engagement, but the severe cold with which I perceive you are afflicted. The vaults are insufferably damp. They are encrusted with nitre. Let us go, nevertheless. The cold is merely nothing. Amontillado, you have been imposed upon. And as for Lucchesi, he cannot distinguish sherry from Amontillado." Thus speaking, Fortunato possessed himself of my arm, putting on a mask of black silk and drawing a roquelaire closely about my person. I suffered him to hurry me to my palazzo. There were no attendants at home. They had absconded to make merry in honor of the time. I had told them that I should not return until the morning, and given them explicit orders not to stir from the house. These orders were sufficient, I well knew, to ensure their immediate disappearance, one and all, as soon as my back was turned. I took from their sconces 2 flambeaux, and giving one to Fortunato, bowed him through several suites of rooms to the archway that led into the vaults. I passed down a long, winding staircase, requesting him to be cautious as he followed. We came at length to the foot of the descent, and stood together on the damp ground of the catacombs of the Montresors. The gait of my friend was unsteady, and the bells upon his cap jingled as he strode. The pipe, said he. It's farther on, said I, but observe the white webwork which gleams from these cavern walls. He turned towards me and looked into my eyes with two filmy orbs that distilled the rheum of intoxication. Niter, he asked at length. Niter, I replied. How long have you had that cough? Sorry, I was trying to replicate his coughing. I didn't want to do it directly into the mic. But yes, that would be Fortunato having a terrible coughing fit. My poor friend found it impossible to reply for many minutes. It is nothing, he said at last. Come, I said with decision. We will go back. Your health is precious. You are rich, respected, admired, beloved. You are happy, as once I was. You are a man to be missed. For me, it is no matter. We will go back. You will be ill, and I cannot be responsible. Besides, there is Lucchesi. Enough, he said. The cough is a mere nothing. It will not kill me. I shall not die of a cough. True, I replied. And indeed, I had no intention of alarming you unnecessarily. But you should use all proper caution. A draught of this medoc will defend us from the damps. Here I knocked off the neck of a bottle which I drew from a long row of its fellows that lay upon the mold. Drink, I said, presenting the wine. He raised it to his lips with a leer. He paused and nodded to me familiarly while his bells jingled. I drink, he said, to the buried that repose around us, and I to your long life. He again took my arm, and we proceeded. These vaults, he said, are extensive. The Montresors, I replied, were a great and numerous family. I forget your odds. A huge human foot door and a huge human foot door and a field azure. The foot crushes a serpent rampant whose fangs are embedded in the heel. And the motto? Nemo me impune lassit. Good, he said. The wine sparkled in his eyes as the bells jingled. My own fancy grew warm with the meadow. We had passed through walls of piled books with casks and puncheons intermingling into the inmost recesses of the catacombs. I paused again, and this time I made bold to seize Fortunato by an arm above the elbow, my bad. The niter, I said. See, it increases. It hangs like moss upon the vaults. We are below the river's bed. The drops of moisture trickle among the bones. Come, we will go back ere it is too late. Your cough. It is nothing, he said. Let us go on. But first, another draught of the medoc. I broke and reached him a flagon of the grave. He emptied it at a breath. His eyes flashed with a fierce light. He laughed and threw the bottle upwards with a gesticulation I did not understand. I looked at him in surprise. He repeated the movement, a grotesque one. You do not comprehend, he said. Not I replied. Then you are not of the Brotherhood. How? You are not of the Masons. Yes. You? Impossible. A Mason? A Mason, I replied. A sign, he asked. It is this, I answered, producing a trowel from beneath the folds of my roquelaire. You jest, he exclaimed, recoiling a few paces. But let us proceed to the Amontillado. Be it so, I said, replacing the tool beneath the cloak, and again offering him my arm. He leaned upon it heavily. We continue our route in search of the Amontillado. We passed through a range of low arches, descended, passed on, and descending again, arrived at a deep crypt in which the foulness of the air caused our flambeau rather to glow than flame. At the most remote end of the crypt, there appeared another less spacious. Its walls had been lined with human remains, piled to the vault overhead, in the fashion of the great catacombs of Paris. 3 sides of this interior crypt were still ornamented in this manner. On the 4th, the bones had been thrown down and lay promiscuously upon the earth, forming at one point a mound of some size. Within the wall thus exposed by the displacing of the bones, we perceived a still interior recess, in depth about 4 feet, in width 3, in height 6 or 7. It seemed to have been constructed for no special use in itself, but formed merely the interval between 2 of the colossal supports of the roof of the catacombs, and was backed by one of their circumscribing walls of solid granite. It was in vain that Fortunato, uplifting his dull torch, endeavored to pry into the depths of the recess. Its termination, the feeble light did not enable us to see. "Proceed," I said. "Herein is the Amontillado. As for Lucchesi—" "He is an ignoramus," interrupted my friend, as he stepped unsteadily forward, while I followed immediately at his heels. In an instant, he had reached the extremity of the niche, and finding his progress arrested by the rock, stood stupidly bewildered. A moment more, and I had fettered him to the granite. On its surface were 2 iron staples, distant from each other about 2 feet horizontally. From one of these depended a short chain, and from the other a padlock. Throwing the links about his waist, it was but the work of a few seconds to secure it. He was too much astounded to resist. Withdrawing the key, I stepped back from the recess. "Pass your hand," I said, "over the wall. You cannot help feeling the nitre. It is indeed very damp. Once more, let me implore you to return." "No? Then I must positively leave you. But must first render you all the little attentions in my power." "The Amontillado!" ejaculated my friend, not yet recovered from his astonishment. "True," I replied. "The Amontillado." One sec, my cat is throwing a fit again. Apologies for that. That'll probably the last kitten exchange for the evening. Let's see, where were we? Right. True, I replied. The Amontillado. As I said these words, I busied myself among the pile of bones of which I had before spoken. Throwing them aside, I soon uncovered a quantity of building stone and mortar. With these materials and with the aid of my trowel, I began vigorously to wall up the entrance of the niche. I had scarcely laid the first tier of my masonry when I discovered that the intoxication of Fortunato had in great measure worn off. The earliest indication I had of this was a low, moaning cry from the depth of the recess. It was not the cry of a drunken man. It was then a long and obstinate silence. I laid the second tier, and the third, and the fourth, and then I heard the furious vibrations of the chain. The noise lasted for several minutes, during which, that I might hearken to it with the more satisfaction, I ceased my labors and sat down upon the bones. When at last the clanking subsided, I resumed the trowel and finished without interruption the fifth, the sixth, and the seventh tier. The wall was now nearly upon a level with my breast. I again paused, and holding the flambeau over the masonwork, threw a few feeble rays upon the figure within. A succession of loud and shrill screams bursting suddenly from the throat of the chained form seemed to thrust me violently back. For a brief moment I hesitated. I trembled. Unsheathing my rapier, I began to grope with it about the recess. The thought of an instant reassured me. I placed my hand upon the solid fabric of the catacombs and felt satisfied. I reapproached the wall. I replied to the yells of him who clamored. I re-echoed. I aided. I surpassed them in volume and in strength. I did this, and the clamorer grew still. It was now midnight, and my task was drawing to a close. I had completed the 8th, the 9th, and the 10th tier. I had finished a portion of the last and the 11th. There remained but a single stone to be fitted and plastered in. I struggled with its weight. I placed it partially in its destined position, but now it came out from the niche, a low laugh that erected the hairs upon my head. It was succeeded by a sad voice, which I had difficulty in recognizing as that of the noble Fortunato. The voice said, "A very good joke indeed. An excellent jest. We will have many a rich laugh about it at the palazzo. Over our wine." "The Amontillado," I said. "Yes, the Amontillado. But is it not getting late? Will not they be awaiting us at the palazzo, the Lady Fortunato and the rest? Let us be gone." "Yes," I said. "Let us be gone." "For the love of God, Montressor!" "Yes," I said. "For the love of God." But to these words I hearkened in vain for a reply. I grew impatient. I called aloud, "Fortunato!" No answer. I called again, "Fortunato!" No answer still. I thrust the torch through the remaining aperture and let it fall within. The ghosts are on point with the bell ringings tonight. There came forth in return only a jingling of bells. My heart grew sick on account of the dampness of the catacombs. I hastened to make an end of my labor. I forced the last stone into its position. I plastered it up. Against the new masonry, I re-erected the old rampart of bones. For the half of a century, no mortal has disturbed them. In pace requiescat. The end. This is a story I've had a very fond fascination with for years because it's multi-layered. The motivations of Montressor are interesting in that Fortunato apparently has done so much to torment Montressor over the years, and poor man took everything Fortunato had. But as soon as Fortunato ventured on insult, that one insult was apparently enough to drive Montressor to taking revenge. And you see at multiple points, you can tell the plan he had concocted, playing to Fortunato's ego, using the bait of Lucchesi to strike at his pride. And even going so far as taking several opportunities to warn Fortunato, "It's dangerous down here. We should go back." But Fortunato insisted. His pride and his drunken behavior would not allow him to retreat. And then at the very end, Montresor kind of seemed taken aback by something. Perhaps his conscience kicked in at the very last second. Before Montresor stuffed it back away, pushed it aside as he finished his task, and then left. And as he mentioned, for half a century, no one had disturbed that spot. So it can be surmised that much time had passed before someone decided to go down there. Perhaps it was Montresor himself, going back down and uncovering the wall. Perhaps an ancestor. Perhaps a servant. Who knows? Montresor did get his revenge, though, and he was able to get it without getting caught. That is that is revenge. Can you imagine Fortunato's last thoughts, though? Being chained against the wall in complete darkness. Well, the light of the torch, the last bit of thing his eyes would see as it slowly burnt out. And then him being trapped in the darkness, down in the catacombs where no one could hear his screams. Truly a terrifying experience, to say the least. I think that'll do for today. I hope you enjoyed our choice of stories this evening. This is fun. I hope you all enjoyed yourselves. These particular stories of terror and fright. We'll go ahead and end things on that note. And who knows? Maybe by the next time we do this, maybe I'll have a proper ASMR microphone. Might be something worth looking into if we do more of these. This is the second time we've done an ASMR session after all, and I think I've got a nice little theme going with them. I think it works. But we'll see when we can pick this up on another time.